Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of thecinematropolis.com, your home to thoughtful conversations on film. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and today we're taking a stroll back through the dark underbelly of the boogeyman who apparently lives in Midwestern America. Not Mr. Sandman. No, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about Michael Myers, or are we? That's right, we're going to be reviewing the conclusion of the Blumhouse Productions Halloween trilogy, the film titled Halloween Ends. We're going to start with an icebreaker question before jumping into a spoiler-free review and then providing a verdict on the film, and then we'll conclude the show by going into an in-depth spoiler discussion. And listen, it's spooky season. It's the best time of the year, so I have to have the best panel of the year to talk about Halloween Ends, and I can't have the best panel of the year if I'm not joined by my co-host, award-winning Oklahoma filmmaker, LaRon Chapman. LaRon, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Also super excited to be rejoined by Christopher Schultz, a contributor at the Cinematropolis and also Lit Reactor. Chris, welcome back to the Cinematic Schematic.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And last but certainly not least, we are joined, first-time reviewer. We've had you on the show in the past as an interview back in the pandemic times. I'm super excited to be joined by an Oklahoma City Council person, OCU English and Modern Languages artist in residence and film professor, James Cooper. James, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Sup?
How's life treating you guys? We were just talking about Halloween costumes before we hit record. Are you guys pumped or what?
Sure. It's going to be a good one this year.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels like the first one where we're not technically post-pandemic, but, you know, just the season, it's feeling a little more cheery.
The temperature has dropped, so I'm happy.
Absolutely. Before we get to today's review, I just want to quickly note that if you're listening to the show today and you enjoy the conversation, you can support us by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review on your preferred podcast app. You certainly want to make sure you do that so as not to be stalked by a Michael Myers-ish character. I will sick Daniel Bokemper on you to review this podcast if you have not done so. So you don't want that. You don't want that. So just head to your preferred podcast app and leave us a rating and a review. I wanted to start today's conversation just by, for those of you who maybe have not heard from Chris or James, I want to get to know you guys a little bit better. So the icebreaker question today relates to this film. So in Halloween Ends, one of the lead characters wears a somewhat unsuspecting yet simultaneously somehow unnerving scarecrow mask. I'll throw it to you first, Chris. What mask or Halloween costume is always going to give you chills?
I'm really not a fan of clowns, honestly. I know that the fear of clowns has become sort of a cliche in and of itself, but I do genuinely find them unnerving. So if I see anyone in just like full clown regalia, I'm going to cross the street.
Just walk away.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the killer clowns from outer space costumes that have been making a resurgence this year?
Those are wonderful. Well, if we're talking about the 80s movie, I do rather love that movie. If I saw someone dressed as a killer clown from outer space, I probably would want to talk to them, actually. Those clowns don't freak me out.
It's weird. Apparently they're getting a video game. There's a resurgence in the zeitgeist around killer clowns from outer space. At least I saw some stores online carrying it.
Well, I guess we're going to look forward to Killer Clowns 2 nostalgia sequel, requel.
Listen, we've run out of other things to mind. Why not go to B-movies?
Probably going to be a cover of the Dickie song, the theme song from some modern band, I would assume. So.
All right, let's keep going around the table. LaRon Chapman, what mask always gives you the chills?
You know, honestly, Michael's is the scariest to me, but to not say the most obvious answer. I also hate clowns, so I have a huge phobia of clowns. But I think probably a close second is probably Leatherface because it's skin. So that also is one that I'm not a huge fan of. But the franchise, yes. The mask, no.
Yeah, it's decaying skin. Is it just because it's skin, or is it something about how it's like decaying, rotten, sewn together? What about it kind of gives you?
All the above. It's stitched together. It's other people's faces. It's gross. It's, and then also they're impersonating someone else. So that also freaks me out. So, yeah.
Which is also the problem with clowns. They've painted that smile on.
I just don't know how to feel when I see them. That's the thing. Yeah.
You don't know who's behind that.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously, it could be anybody. Yeah, creepy. James Cooper, what mask consistently gives you the chills?
Do y'all remember a movie called Return to Horror High? Do you know this?
Yeah.
George Clooney's first.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a long time, but
From the 80s slasher, arguably self-aware meta thing. But the killer's mask in that is like a proto Scream, like blank expression. And I just always find it so creepy, and it's super underutilized in that film. And I really wish someone would do that. Otherwise, just to keep the flesh conversation going, I wish someone would do the Fly remake as a costume.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
They're constantly having to vomit over all around.
Just carry a donut around and just like vomit on it. And like every time someone says hi, he's like, "Bleh."
It's always been my dream to be really good at makeup. I've never actually been good at it, so I've never been able to do these complex Halloween costumes that I envision. But like doing a full Freddy makeup, for instance, would be something I've always wanted to do. Like I don't want to just wear a mask, and that's cheating, I think. So
Yeah.
I want the makeup, I want prosthetics, but I'm poor and I'm not good at it. So.
It takes practice. I'm sure if you start now, 5 years from now, by the time we get another Nightmare on Elm Street, you'll be ready.
Yeah, we'll see about that one.
I guess TBD.
I'm getting up there too, so
Well, I think The Fly is a good one, actually. That movie still has the unique distinction of being I watched that on television the first time, which you would think it's edited for TV, so it couldn't possibly be that gruesome. But I'm here to tell you the version I watched when I was probably 14 on television, pretty gruesome, pretty terrifying, so much so that anytime I think about the final transformation at the end of the film, I mean, like right now I'm getting goosebumps. Oof, that's gross. Yes, I'm going to go with ventriloquist dummy dolls or makeup. I don't know what it is. Chucky kind of freaks me out. LaRon, I know you were giving us a little sneak peek at your Halloween costume. Chucky freaks me out as a doll, but then when you see like adults dressed as him, it's not as weird. But ventriloquist dolls, that movie Dead Silence that came out, 10 plus years ago now. Not super duper scary, but the dolls were terrifying. The movie was kind of creepy, but the dolls, in particular, the design were pretty haunting.
James Wayne's first foray into dolls turning their head slowly and looking into the camera.
Yeah, I know. And if you're me, it somehow it just gets you every time.
It gets me in a different way, but it doesn't scare me. It just makes me mad.
Yeah. It was, James Wan, early experiments. So anyway, ventriloquist dummies. I had someone who actually came to a Halloween party I hosted last year with ventriloquist dummy makeup on. I didn't tell them, but
I remember that person.
Yeah.
I was there.
Yeah, you were. Yeah, it freaked me out a little bit.
Yeah, I was not comfortable with them.
I didn't tell them this, but anyway. If you're listening, you know who you are, and I promise it was a great costume. I was mortified. All right, listeners. Well, what sort of Halloween mask or Halloween costume always gives you the chills? You can let us know by following us on social media and hitting us up on Facebook or Twitter, or you can send us an email at thecinemetropolis@gmail.com. But let's move on to the main event today, which is our review of Halloween Ends.
It's been 4 years since Michael Myers vanished without a trace.
Hello.
I was certain that I saw him watching me.
You pretend like you moved on, but you're actually just obsessed with death.
What are you gonna do when Michael comes back for you? Because he is coming.
But this time, something feels different. He's more dangerous.
So according to IMDb, Halloween Ends is described as the saga of Michael Myers and Laurie Strode comes to a spine-chilling climax in this final installment of this trilogy. And listeners, I wish you could this isn't a video media, but I really wish you could see the faces based on the IMDb.
It's very similar to my face when we discussed Jurassic Park Dominion.
Yes, actually, great. Yeah.
Halloween Dominion.
Yes. For those of you who didn't catch that episode, that synopsis straight up lied to us about what the movie was about. Yeah, this is not far off.
Can I just point out, I watched that Dominion movie a few weeks ago, and my main problem, and there are many with that film, but my main one is like they set up the dinosaurs being in the world, Jurassic World Dominion. But for what? An hour of the movie, maybe an hour and a half, we're on a fucking island again.
That's right.
Again.
With fences.
Why?
And isn't it? It's like locusts or something.
Yeah, it's
Locusts are actually the real threat.
The real threat.
I haven't seen it, but
Yeah.
Listen,
sounds
Peacock.
biblical.
It's Peacock. You can
An
see that.
island again. I mean, I mean, honestly, as messy or sloppy as whatever they could have done off that island, I would have preferred to like
Yeah.
that.
That self-contained, yeah, for sure.
you go back and check out our review on that, but I was so hopeful coming off of the second one, which I was also disappointed in, but I was like, but maybe we got this crappy second movie to get a great third movie. Not unlike Halloween Kills to Halloween Ends. Maybe we get a crappy second movie for a great finale. Well,
Perhaps.
ladies and gentlemen, you may be finding yourself with some deja vu if you listen to our Jurassic World Dominion review. That said, a couple of fun facts I wanted to throw at listeners so they're in the know. Halloween Ends is the 13th movie in this franchise, which is 44 years old, by the way, and it is the third movie in the David Gordon Green, Danny McBride, Blumhouse Productions iteration, so the version that started with 2018's Halloween. The film marks the 12th appearance of Michael Myers in the 13 movies, as the only time he did not appear was in Halloween 3 Season of the Witch.
now technically he did appear in Halloween 3. He's on TV.
And isn't the doctor sifting through? No, it's not Michael's ashes. That's right. They're watching Halloween. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Also, Dick Warlock is in it in a very Michael Myers-esque moment. So.
This is the most horror con moment. Well, actually,
I was totally that guy. I was totally that guy. My
for Bernie.
apologies.
Listen, we get to fact check us sometimes, Chris, because if you're not, the internet's going to do it, and I don't want that to happen.
I am the internet now.
And lastly, for those of you who have enjoyed the scores in these three movies, well, it's because this one, like the last two, have been scored by John and Cody Carpenter. So, fun stuff. I know we're going to talk in depth about Halloween Ends, spoiler-free review, but before we do, just really quickly, I want to just get a quick gut check so listeners know kind of how we're approaching this film as it relates to our relationship with David Gordon Green's first two films, Halloween and Halloween Kills. So, James, what did you think of those first two films?
So, to bring another trilogy that's been requeled, is that the
I like Legacy sequel better, but we'll go with requel because that's what Scream 5 said.
Star Wars? I find this franchise very similar to the new Star Wars. So when I saw Force Awakens and when I saw the 2018 Halloween, it was kind of a similar. I had this kind of going, well, it's skewing a little too close to the original, but I get it. They're setting something up. It's kind of nice to have these legacy characters back. I love the chase scene in that 18 film where Oscar's death. I think the John Carpenter score there is called The Shape Stalks Allison. I think that's the strongest part of that whole film.
That's with the light, like the light. That
Yeah,
keeps
the
going
light
on and off in
flashing
the back.
motion
Yeah.
detector. I rewatched the 2018 film in preparation for Halloween Kills last year and came away kind of hating it. I thought its approach to mental health was very deeply problematic. And then Halloween Kills, I hate. There's very few films I viscerally hate. It is one of them. And I felt very similar watching Last Jedi, not for the reasons that the internet did, because they're not the racist reasons, but oh wow. And actually behind Laurent is an Empire Strikes Back poster. And I just felt like for all intents and purposes, that's what I was watching with Last Jedi, was just like that again. Though some of those elements show up in Force Awakens also. But I also hate Rise of Skywalker. I almost stood up and left.
That is a movie I too vehemently hate because it's just a bad movie.
But that's how I feel about Halloween Kills, which I think is I think Chris called it joyless earlier when we were talking.
Generally not super high on the last two films. Laurent Chapman, what are your thoughts on the first two films?
I'm still pretty warm on the 2018 version just because I liked the stripped back to the basics kind of approach that they went with it. I think once it got kind of convoluted as the series went on, that's what I liked the most about the original one, was that it was just it was more about the tension and the kind of this psychological terror than it was just about the brutality of it. So I appreciated that. It's not as high in my mind as it was when I saw it initially. I think initially the high of just seeing Laurie Strode and the generational, seeing the 3 Strode women, that I liked the idea of that. I think Kills was a huge like shock to the senses, because the first one did seems just so competent, and the second one just felt like it's kind of like when M. Night Shyamalan went off on his, he went from being really strong to like you almost wonder if he ever wrote any of his movies.
Imagine if Lady in the Water was his second movie.
Exactly.
Sort of thing.
It's like, this is not the same person did not make this film that made the last one. So that's what it felt like with Kills. My hatred for that one I've warmed to that one as well, just being a slasher film, just for the kills itself. It does sell its title, but as a competently made movie, it's just not there. And I will just say honestly, before we even get to ends, that all 3 of these movies seem to have a personality disorder. They do not feel like they are part of the same universe. It does feel like, hey, it's your turn. Like it sounds like 3 different people made these different movies. They all have a very distinct vibe to them. They all have their own unique strengths and weaknesses, and they're not the same in any of them, which makes for an interesting ride. Interesting, if not completely, enjoyable.
You've warmed on Halloween Kills somewhat.
Warmed. I don't think it's good.
Starting ice cold, though.
Yeah, starting. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, all right.
Mariah Carey, she's thawing out for Christmas. That's where I'm at. So.
Right. Wrong holiday.
You're wrong. Fair enough.
How about Halloween?
It's in the title. Don't worry. We'll do the Mariah Carey Christmas special,
so
Laurent,
much.
2 months from now.
Thank you. I'll just wait here until then.
Christopher Schultz, what did you think of the last 2 Halloween films?
Similar to Laurent, I loved the 2018 film when I first saw it, when it first came out. I think the high of seeing Laurie Strode back and not having Rob Zombie's take again and I've even, back in 2018, I was just like, Rob Zombie's movies are terrible. I've changed since then to kind of come back around to like, I don't know that they're terrible. I don't know that they're good, but they're not terrible either. They have their place. But yeah, at the time, like really wanting to kind of get back to, the Michael Myers that we knew. I mean, we just had Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, which is barely a Halloween film in terms of Michael Myers actually being there. I mean, he's walking around without his mask on. It was a much different take. So yeah, being really excited to see Jamie Lee back. And I mean, overall, it's scripted well. I mean, it's Laurent's word, competent. It's a competently made film. So, do I hate it? No. Do I love it? No. I'm kind of middling around that one. 2018. Halloween Kills, I also similarly really hated. James is right. I use the word joyless. It's a very joyless, it's a slog. It's a slog to get through that movie. I made the comparison earlier when we were talking to the Final Destination films where, I mean, those movies are about kills, right? Like that's what those movies are. But you can have fun watching it because it's like, it's a roller coaster ride. I mean, there's even roller coaster kills in one of them. I think the third one, yes. They're like funhouse movies, and they're really over the top in the sort of Rube Goldberg way that these deaths play out in these films. And there's a sense of humor behind it. It's a dark sense of humor, sure. But, Halloween Kills is humorless. It's just scene after scene after scene of people dying. And it's not fun. And to talk to the point that Laurent made, that all 3 of these feel like different films, but made by the same person. It really did kind of feel like the special effects department were in charge of Halloween Kills. So like, well, let's a fluorescent light bulb death. Let's how many different ways can we come up for Michael to like kill people? And it's just that for like 2 hours. So wasn't really keen on that one. It felt very soulless and joyless. And now here we are at the third one.
Yeah. So I think similarly to you and Laurent, I did like Halloween 2018. And James, I really like the comparison to The Force Awakens because I hadn't made the connection. But my experience with both of those films was pretty similar. I was like, oh my God, Force Awakens. First time I watched it, so much fun. Great to see the old gang back. Was a little disappointed by the lack of innovation in the story, but just the sheer idea of having Star Wars with those actors on the screen was just such an experience. But then, the longer you think about it, the more it cools off, the more you're like, oh, did I ever want to rewatch that one? Not really. Like, there's not really a lot there to go back to other than the new characters they introduced. Not a lot there. Same with Halloween 2018. I think I revisited it last year before Kills and was just disappointed. It just didn't, like, I remember really having a great time thinking the kills were really brutal. And I don't know, maybe it's kind of worn tired, but it didn't really add anything new to the Michael Myers. And then especially the mental health piece at the beginning is pretty rough. And I also have to say, disrespect to podcasters. They made podcasters seem predatory in that movie. So come on now. I'm kind of in the middle of the road. I feel like it's inessential. Like if it pops up, I'm at a friend's house and we're watching it. Sure, I'll sit down. But I don't think I would rather go back to Halloween 4, for example, and watch that again rather than Halloween 2018.
It's more fun. It's more fun to watch than 2018.
Halloween Kills, though, Chris, I'm going to disagree. It was not joyless. It was, in fact, hilarious because of how awful it was. Evil dies tonight. That is the legacy of the movie.
That is pretty funny. Yeah.
Anytime I can pull that gif or meme out of my pocket, I do. Now, the movie is complete and utter trash. There's no plot. They sideline Laurie for the whole movie. I could go on. It's just, it felt like... hey, you guys want a slasher movie where he just goes and kills, the body count's really high and we make it look really flashy? That's what we got. But there really wasn't even any meaningful sort of thematic follow-up from that first film. I'm still pretty cold on it, Ron, I'd say.
That's fine.
But that does, in fact, bring us to Halloween Ends. Chris Schultz, I'm going to throw it back to you. What did you think of this film?
It's okay. I will say that. I think that's where I'm at right now. It's okay. I will say they definitely did try to do something different from the rest of the series. I appreciate the effort. I just don't think it was executed very well.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The Ron Chapman?
Yeah, I'm of two minds. Verbatim what he said, ditto to that. I think as a fan, I was underwhelmed. From the filmmaker writer standpoint, I'm like, I asked for something different. They gave it to me. It's not what I ordered, but it is something different. It's kind of like just a few things needed to be tweaked for me to really embrace this one, the way that I would have liked to. But yeah, I think I'm pretty middle of the road with this one.
I know, LaRon, you were really excited because we had Laurie Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis sidelined so much. Were you satisfied with the amount of Laurie Strode?
I was fine with Laurie Strode. I don't think she's the issue in this film. I just think just structurally there's just a lot of, I felt like we got 4 different tones here. I think at one point we got a Steel Magnolias movie. We got a little bit of Drive, a little bit of Christine, or maybe a lot of bit of Christine. So it felt like it didn't really know what it wanted to be. It felt like a pick your own adventure, and it just felt like weird for that to be pigeonholed into the last chapter when really there's nothing left in this story teed up from the first 2 that needs to be in this third one besides Michael and Laurie just having it out.
Which is what was marketed.
And that's fine. But we did not exactly get that movie. We got a different movie.
James Cooper, what did you think of Halloween Ends?
I think I mostly liked it. I keep thinking about how the original plan, that there was not going to be a Halloween 2, right? That was never the plan. And there's that kind of famous story of Carpenter drunk, having to write the script for Halloween 2 and just like, I don't know what the story is, and comes up with Laurie's his sister. That's the story. And so that tells me that Halloween 2 shouldn't exist, right? Although I'll say it is the second best in the franchise as far as I'm concerned. And then the plan from there, and you just know it from the ending of Halloween 2, right, is his eyes have been shot out, the fire's coming out of his eyes too, because he's also on fire. Like, that's it for Michael. And the plan was an anthology, and that's beginning to be what we get in the third film. And this film felt like the fulfilling of that promise, because part 4 was the Akkad family saying, not just saying, but like the poster is like, he's back, and it's this giant face on there. And that film, even for as kind of somewhat fun as it is, like the rooftop scene, I think is incredible in that film, for instance. But like, I rewatched it a year ago when Danielle Harris was in town.
Oh yeah,
at Rodeo, and the whole time I just kept thinking, God, I wish she was showing part 5. I'm a huge defender of 5. I'm not telling it's good. I'm just saying, will defend. But I thought that when you watch part 4, it skews way too close to the first film and thusly becomes kind of boring. And I think that speaks to the fact that, like, what real story is there to tell with Michael Myers? And I thought this film at least tried to lean into that. Like, what if you told a series of stories set in Haddonfield, and you had part of that slasher story with him intersect with new characters, but also maybe some characters from that last time. And it doesn't always work. In fact, I think the weakest parts of this film are like Laurie's narration. I just tend to just find like it's nowhere near as bad as the YouTube dialogue in Halloween Kills. You know what I'm talking about. Like, they speak like they're on YouTube trailers, and I hate it. Whereas this film, the dialogue seems mostly more organic. I don't love this film. I'm not telling you this is a good film, but I think like Halloween 5 and like Rob Zombie's theatrical cut of Halloween 2, we're trying something a bit different, and I'm here for it.
I want to echo the sentiment that's already been shared by the three of y'all, which is I really like that we're trying something different. In fact, there were many times when I was really, really into the main thrust of the story, which features a new character. And then they're like, wait a second. This is a Halloween movie. Michael Myers has got to be in it. He overshadows this entire film. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because he really doesn't belong in the story they're trying to tell. I love, again, we'll get into it in a more spoiler section, but sort of the thesis, I think it's safe to say this is, what if the damage Michael Myers did was irreparable? It went beyond just murdering people. He infected this town with fear. That's cool. They tried awkwardly and bluntly and poorly, and Halloween Kills tried to approach the same theme of like, oh, the angry lynch mob gets out of control because they're afraid of Michael Myers. This is more the long game because it's set 4 years later. So what if this fear has festered, and what would it do to a town?
They shot themselves in the foot with that, though. And I don't know if we're quite where we should be with spoiler talk yet, but the fear that Michael Myers has apparently inflicted upon this town is not at all present. The fears and the blame have been shifted to another character.
Right.
And Michael Myers is really not mentioned in terms of like how haunted this town is.
It's how they use him is inconsistent. So I agree. So I'll say more for spoilers, but I'll say that the thesis of the movie, or one of the theses of the movie, and some of the ideas they're playing with and the characters I'm really into, but the execution's totally botched. I think if you take it's going to sound crazy, but if you take Michael Myers out of the story and they do things a little differently with the ending, I actually think it's a better movie. And I'll just leave it at that. James, you said they were leaning back in the day, leaning towards the anthology approach with Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. I personally think there's way more room for some compelling stories that way. This movie tries to, I think, push it as far as they can before someone, whether it be the Akkad family, whether it be Blumhouse, says, yeah, but people want to see Laurie fight Michael Myers. That said, I feel like it sort of hinders the film overall. But I want to ask about, when we talk about how well Halloween Kills delivered on, the kills and thrills, the slasher films, things that everyone looks for. Do you guys think this film delivers on those things? Do you think people who want to see that are going to be satisfied, LeBron?
No, I felt like, and I don't go just for primal, whatever. Like I do look for a story. But I think if we're just specifically talking about that element, I think Kills delivers on, it gives the buffet of murder and mayhem, whereas this one, it's a much more character-driven story, which I don't mind in general. I think definitely the deaths was surprisingly, there's 2 or 3 notable ones, I will say, pretty cool ones too, that I think are memorable just in the larger sphere. But I think as a whole, it's pretty light on the murder. There's a lot more dialogue, and more like just conversation, talking out the themes of the movie than there are, actual slasher like kills and murders.
James?
I think it delivers, but like I found when I was doing my my ranking on my Instagram stories the other day, and I know we're going to talk rankings later, and I still found myself ranking 3, 6, and 5 ahead of this one. And I've been like struggling because like any good horror nerd, it's like, well, I don't know. And I keep wondering why. And I think part of it is like, I think a lot of the characters, the new characters this film introduces, like, I just hate. Like, I know we're supposed to, and that's kind of my problem. Like, I wish there was some depth to some of those characters so that when they die, there's some stakes, there's some drama there. And so that was really missing. So like, you know, that was a big problem for me. But, well, and then the other thing too about Halloween 5 and 6, as I've been thinking about them, it's like, why would I rank those higher? Like in so many ways, this movie is not a slasher movie, right?
Yeah.
And those two films are, and they have like one of the most, I think, important, you know, tropes of the subgenre, which is a chase scene. And that was really missing here too. And I think, say what you will about The Curse of Michael Myers, I think that chase scene with Kara Strode is just one of the best things. Yeah. And I think the chase scene in the woods with Tina and Jamie is just incredible in part 5. I mean, it's no prom night, but or Sarah Michelle, and I Know What You Did Last Summer. But no, I mean, let's be real. I think Corey's. Are we allowed to say that?
Yeah, you can say his name.
Okay. Well, am I allowed to say what he does?
You can say that he's in the film, and he's a prominent character.
Okay. Let's just say that the string of deaths that happen toward the end of the film. I mean, I don't think you can deny like those are gory and
there's one in particular that I was pretty impressed by. I have to say, Chris, any other thoughts on the kills?
I mean, so if you're going into this and you know, particularly if you liked Halloween Kills, and the sort of inventiveness and the goriness and the brutality of the deaths in that film, there are you know, towards the end of Act 2, there are a few that happen that, you know, if you're looking for that, if you're going in for that, you'll get what you came for. That's it though. I mean, you're not going to get it anywhere else in the film. So if you really liked Halloween Kills and you're going in for more of that, you're not going to get it. I personally felt this movie didn't need those scenes. Honestly, they felt to bring Rob Zombie into the conversation and his Halloween movies, you know, not you know, whatever. But he has a famous quote about the Devil's Rejects and why he decided to cut the scene of Dr. Satan in the hospital from the film. And he said it's because tonally the Devil's Rejects was so different that it felt like, you know, Chewbacca showing up in Bonnie and Clyde. And these kill scenes feel like Chewbacca showing up in Bonnie and Clyde for me. Like they feel tacked on. They feel, because, you know, we need really gory, brutal stuff like this to happen in this particular series. Cause you know, 2018 was pretty brutal too. All things
kind of an obligation. Like they have to put it
was
in there
obligatory.
somewhere.
It felt like, and I don't think they needed them. So that being said, I mean, they're awful. They're impressive. The effects on them are impressive, but they didn't do much for me.
Yeah, I think in terms of where they fit in the story, there was one in particular I thought was an impressive kill, but yeah, it was completely accident that doesn't really change the movie in any way.
And with a character that like we meet briefly, and he says some mildly nasty things too.
That's one of those characters introduced with a specific, and even when you get introduced to him, like, oh, they're gonna kill this guy brutally at some point. Yeah,
he's too annoying to not. Like, he has to go at some point.
Yeah.
Well, and again, because as I was listening to Chris, I was thinking of Zombies Halloween 2 remake again. Like it's not even fully a chase scene in that film, but the scene with the Danielle Harris Annie character, like that whole sequence. From the bathroom to, you know, whatever room he's chasing her into. Like that scene is powerful because we care about her. Mm-hmm. Like as a complex human being who I would say in the first film is kind of mean in some ways, but we watch her become this incredibly sympathetic character in that next film, so that when that brutal moment happens to her in the second film, it just carries a weight. And I just wish that I wish there were more characters like that in this film who meet those sorts of demises, as opposed to characters who clearly the film, like you just mentioned, there's a character who they just set up to be like, oh yeah, well, it's like, I mean, all of them are like
Pretty much most of them that die brutally are introduced. Yeah. So really quickly, because we're going to dive really deep into this in spoilers. So I just really, for those of folks who haven't seen the movie yet, does the film provide a satisfying conclusion to the trilogy, starting with Halloween 2018? We don't need to go too in depth here. Again, we're going to talk about that in spoilers for those of you who have seen the film or don't mind to be spoiled. Chris, I'll start with you.
The idea that these three films comprise a trilogy at all is just kind of gone at this point. So I'd say no, it doesn't.
No.
It's really, and I'll go into more in depth with this, but it definitely feels, this third film feels like a pre-existing script that was shoehorned into this particular Halloween franchise. And for what it's trying to do as a standalone film, it's playing with some good ideas. I think it really could have worked. But yeah, as far as a trilogy and a saga goes, no, it did not.
Yep. All right. LaRon?
I think in the context of the trilogy, no. In the context of the entire franchise, it's, for me, one of the more interesting thematically than a lot of the lackluster
I'm going to put
sequels.
you on the spot. Is it more interesting than The Cult of Thorn, LaRon?
I'll answer for him.
No.
Maybe it is. I don't know.
Well, I mean, here's the problem is, LaRon, to your point, though, the bar is pretty low. Resurrections is really, I mean, yeah.
That's unforgivable. That one's unforgivable. This one, at least, is an interesting mess, if not a.
So relative to the whole franchise, this is satisfying. James?
I'm going to say yes with an asterisk, and I want to come when we go into the spoilers. I'll talk more about that. But I will say, so my major problem with the 2018 film is I don't understand many of the decisions that Danny McBride and Gordon Green are doing, because we're gonna wipe the slate clean. It's a direct sequel to Halloween 2 or to Halloween. So we're going to ignore all the sequels, but we're going to make visual references to H2O with the podcasters in the bathroom. We're going to, just one by one, we're going to do Halloween Kills in a hospital. All these references, and all the unfortunate thing about that is all I kept thinking was man, the ending of H2O is one of the most satisfying movie theater experiences anyone could have. That moment where she chops that man's head off, and
people cheered.
And the score hits in such a great way.
And that shot of her with the axe and that final shot, that's impactful. Yeah,
powerful. And so then you watch 2018 and you're like, well, she's drunk again. Why are we doing? Seriously.
We've already been here.
What are we doing? They remove the whole she's the sister thing, but then find this incredibly convoluted way to get Myers to her house.
Yeah.
So just in terms of satisfying conclusions, I'm already a bit because I'm not really sure why these films exist in some ways, except for money.
Yeah.
But I will say, I didn't quite feel this watching it in the theater, but rewatching it today, I think the intimacy of the way he shoots their fight in that kitchen, I think is really well executed.
Sure.
Super well executed. And in that way, I find that satisfying. But I have more to say about that later.
I also have more to say about that. I think it's a great sequence that would have fit better in a different movie. That's how I would put it. But it's a shame Resurrection really stole H2O's concluding moment because H2O. I think, James, to your point, we were talking about this before we started recording. I think, LaRon, you laid out this ideal track of Halloween 1, 2, and then H2O. It's perfect. It really, Halloween 2, maybe not as strong as the original, but I thought, when they said they were going to go back and reboot it, and it was going to be Laurie wrestling with a sort of PTSD, survivor's, guilt or whatnot, I was like, well, they did that in Halloween H2O. And initially I was like, oh, this is really visceral. This is the Doomsday Prepper version. So it's a different take. And I was interested to see where they go with it. But the reality is, especially in this film, without being too specific, she sort of ends up in a very similar place as H2O, but with like a lot of nonsense in between Halloween and Halloween Ends. So this whole series feels pretty unnecessary to me, honestly. Even though I thought 2018 was solid, this whole thing is kind of a mess.
And to your point about how it's approached in H2O, I think the PTSD and all of that, and we talked about this before the podcast, but was that I felt like that was handled a lot more organically and believably in H2O.
Way more nuanced.
Yeah, it's this here, like you said, the Doomsday out in the woods with the whatever feels a little caricature of that kind of
over the top,
like, it's just really hammy in that way. Whereas in H2O, it just felt like a woman that was truly just
she was haunted
by his presence. And I thought that was so much more effective in that one, which is so crazy to think that H2O of all movies is the one that just works for me. I rewatch that every Halloween because that one it's short, it's lean, it's satisfying.
But there's still a lot to chew on. It feels like it follows up on the previous films without requiring the audience to have watched all the other sequels. And
I'm emotionally invested, so it's just So
apparently, Jamie Lee Curtis was not happy with how H2O came out, which was part of what inspired her to do 2018. Was because they said we're going to explore some of these themes that were present, but kind of forgotten about.
So you're saying it's Jamie's fault?
I'm not saying it's Jamie Lee's fault. No. I'm simply saying
and I'm sure we'll explore this a little bit more in the spoilers, but I do put some blame at her doorstep.
Sure. I think so.
Like, I think the interviews that she and Gordon Green were doing around Halloween Kills were trauma, Black Lives Matter. It's insulting. Particularly if you follow those themes through in that film, like, well, what are you saying about mobs and what are you saying about cops? Right? Oh, that moment where Hawkins in the hospital says to her, I should have shot Michael when he surrendered. No, he shouldn't have. I'm sorry. And I know that's going to like maybe upset some like horror fans, but really, because Michael's pure evil, man, and you have to destroy him. It's like, okay, well, let's just put it this way. In Oklahoma, right, just to put on my counselor hat real quick. In Oklahoma, we have a shortage of mental health counselors, right? We are number one in trauma statistics in the entire country. Number one in adverse childhood experiences. Number one of things happening to people in their childhood that shape them into doing some criminal behaviors as adults. We are number one in incarcerating people as a result of that. The school districts here in Oklahoma City, 12% of our kids are reading at a fourth grade proficient reading level. Okay, so what happened when you combine those statistics with the last 40 years of not funding access to mental health care, particularly in your rural parts of Oklahoma, and then movie-wise, on screen, you have your villainous characters be mental health patients? What are you telling people about mental health? Particularly when people who have mental health issues are considerably, demonstrably more likely to be victims of perpetrators of violence. So I think it's a super dangerous moment in the 2018 in Halloween Kills, when Hawkins says to Laurie, "I should have shot him." Because remember in the flashback, Michael he is standing there, right? And Hawkins like, "I should have killed him." And I think that is part of the problem in this country is there's still so much mental health stigma and a lack of understanding that every single person should be in therapy. And I believe that strongly because you're not just traumatized by your childhoods sometimes, but events traumatize us. We're the home of the bombing. There's 9/11. I don't know how about you all, how you've been feeling about the pandemic, right?
But don't skip over Trump era, like all of that. So there's so much, there's multiple crises. Yeah.
Did everyone pay? Did they pay for therapy for the survivors of the Tulsa race massacre? You see what I'm saying? Like there's so much we've been through, and I really worry about the representation of Michael Myers as this embodiment of pure evil.
Right.
And so I do, and you'll hear Jamie Lee Curtis use this sort of language, and I just think it's a problem. And I think in some ways what it says is I think she has misunderstood that original film. I think that Loomis is kind of a villain in that film. Like he's
He's nuts.
He's out of his mind. Think about that. Think if a psychiatrist or psychologist said, I've been trying to work with this child and I'm just going to give up and I think he should be locked away forever. Like put that in real world context, right? So I think John Carpenter's Halloween is a critique of that guy, Loomis, especially when you go back and you listen to interviews with Carpenter where he says, and he said this in recent years, that Myers for him represents, because Carpenter as an adolescent lives in, I believe it's Tennessee, maybe Kentucky, and he was so confused how it was that white people, middle-class Christian white people, y'all know this, right? This was like new to me about a few years ago, that middle-class Christian white, you've heard this, Lauren?
Vaguely. I think I know where you're going, but yes.
Middle-class Christian white people could, during times of lynchings in the 50s and 60s, kind of just be okay with it and be okay with segregation, be okay with Jim Crow segregation, be okay with black people not being able to vote. To kind of be like, well, I don't know, I'm kind of moderate. Maybe you guys could like slow down. And he was like, how is it possible that someone can appear human and act inhumanly? Right. And that's Michael Myers. And if you do that, if that's the metaphor, then what's going on then to have these sort of like where we need to shoot him?
Well, and I thought, especially you mentioned this in your review for 2018's, and I think that the part it really has soured for me too is they make such a big they treat a mental hospital like a house of horrors.
Yes,
at the beginning, it's not, oh man, these people need help. It's these guys are crazy. Yeah. They're gonna try to kill you. Yeah. It's just not
lazy.
great.
It's lazy.
Very lazy.
You got that in the 78 film too, a little bit, like the shot of like when Michael has escaped and like the mental health patients are just sort of roaming around like cattle, like they're not people. And it's like, that's tough to see. But like, and this doesn't excuse it really, but it's like, that's 1978. You know what I mean? Like we made mistakes. We've been making mistakes. We're still making mistakes in cinema, but that was 1978. We're talking 2018.
And not only have we not made progress, the statement the movie is making is that we're doubling down on the fact that he is pure evil.
Yes.
And this movie, which we'll get into in spoilers, is like, he's pure evil. Like there's no ambiguity. He has to go. And again, stemming from the idea that he is a mental health patient is, it's kind of concerning. And, I know horror has often been associated. A lot of horror is framed through a conservative lens. Sometimes, people have sex or do drugs. They get murdered, things of that nature. It's just, I guess the lack of progress is pretty disturbing and disappointing.
Well, and when you go back, it's not just film making the mistake with 1978, because like for all of Carpenter's arguably progressive commentary with that film, as Chris is pointing out, like the representation of mental health patients at the beginning, and I don't want to talk about mental health patients. I want to say people with mental health, concerns, issues, right? Traumas. Even for all that, like the field of psychology was nowhere near where it is today in its understanding of trauma, healing from trauma. And so in that way, you can almost kind of forgive Carpenter in that film, because that is kind of how a lot of these folk would talk about people with mental health.
Well, and it was just sort of like give them enough Thorazine that they can't function and let them rot. And
but where we are with mental health awareness now, the conversation, the discourse around that, it's almost like we know better now. We should know better.
And Jamie Lee Curtis and David Gordon Green should know better too. But when we get into the spoilers, I would suggest to you that this film almost gets it. Like I think
it gets closer.
I think the Corey Cunningham character almost gets it.
Yep. Yeah. The exploration of trauma in this film is so much more nuanced and eloquent than the last two films. Even though it doesn't get all the way there.
No.
It is closer though.
E for effort.
Speaking of letters, let's get into letter grades here. So this is a two-part question. I want to go around the table and get a letter grade from each of you. What letter grade? So for those of you who remember the school grades, it's A, B, C, D. We skip E for some reason, go to F. Pluses and minuses are allowed. Also, I want to get follow-up thought. Where would you rank this in the series? if you have provided a full 13 movie rating, you're welcome to put it out there. I didn't do that, but
I did not write that down.
But if you have one ready and you want to go through it, that's cool. Otherwise, just more generally, like this is in the top or the middle or the bottom, more than likely. LaRon Chapman, I'll start with you.
I think currently I'm at a solid C, smacked out in the middle, not a minus or plus. I think I could warm to a B minus. I don't think it'll ever go beyond that. But I think that's, as I'm talking about it now, as we're talking about it, all these different things with it, I feel like I could theoretically like this one a lot more. I did see it twice. I liked it more the second time. Maybe with some distance away from it, I could warm to a higher degree. But right now, it's in the middle. I think that as far as ranking, Resurrections is gonna remain the bottom of the barrel for me. I think Rob Zombie's second film will be there right underneath it. And I just, this one is definitely, I'm sorry, James, 5 is next.
Oh my God.
And then as we keep going on, it's somewhere in between there. I definitely think 1, 2, H2O, and, I'll split hairs with 4 and 6, but it's underneath those and above the 3 that I mentioned at the bottom. So
it's lower middle.
Lower middle.
Yeah.
Lower middle.
Yeah, lower middle. Okay. James, I saw some reactions there. What letter grade would you give this, and how would you rank it?
Before I say this, I just want you to know that when I left the theater, I don't think I would have said what I'm about to say. But as I thought about it more, I think I'm in a pretty solid B minus B.
Okay.
Like, again, the narration stuff with Laurie, I find pretty unforgivable. I think but the dialogue is such an improvement on kills.
Yes.
Such an improvement on kills. I think just the opening scene alone.
Oh yeah.
The cinematography.
That's great.
And I think that scene, and I know we'll go into it later, but I think that scene, I wish there had been more like that in the rest of the film before we even, it already slow burns, but I wish there were more moments, like the way the kid is talking about Michael Myers haunting and out there. I wish that had kept going more. But I just think the way that opening hits is so good, And then to have the credits be the font from Halloween, the season of the witch, telling you right then, it's like, no, this is not going to be a traditional Halloween film. I think that's so neat. I mostly enjoyed this film. Okay, so ranking wise. So Halloween, of course, Halloween 2, H2O. I would say then I think it just kind of blurs for me. Like maybe it's Curse of Michael Myers, maybe it's Halloween 2, the theatrical version, maybe then it's Halloween 3, and I think I would just kind of interchange those at different points. And then I think you get to Ends. Like I think Ends, and I actually think in terms of the references this film is making, it's making references to 3 and 6 more strongly. And so when I think of it in that way, I feel like I have to put 3 and 6 ahead of it. Only because you can't get this film without those two films. Yeah. Especially think of like the opening where the little boy, the mom saying like, he just hears voices. I'm like, well, what does that sound like? Right. It's the little boy in 6, right? And then putting 5 ahead of it makes sense to me insofar as like this film fulfilled the promise, and we'll head into the spoilers, I know, but it fulfilled the promise of the ending of part 4.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Right? Sure.
Yes.
And so I have to
until it didn't. It was so close.
I'm way more forgiving. I think Michael does belong in this film, and we'll talk about that later. But I just think that 3 and 5 and 6 were already you can't have this film without it, and then everything from there is just like kind of hit or miss for me.
All right. Okay. Christopher Schultz.
I'm in more of the C, maybe almost leaning to a D camp personally for this film. Mostly because, and again, I will get more into this as we get into the spoilery section, but this movie is obsessed with David Lynch, like very obsessed with David Lynch. And there are hard references to David Lynch's work, primarily Blue Velvet and Fire Walk with Me. And a little bit of like Twin Peaks: The Return is in there too. And I felt more annoyed by that than charmed by it. Maybe that's just the frame of mind I'm in right now. I might be fine later, but I did sort of like, oh God, okay, here's another David Lynch. And I love David Lynch. Don't get me wrong. It's not because like I hated seeing it. I don't know why. I was also not that familiar with David Gordon Green and Danny McBride, other than Righteous Gemstones and Vice Principals, which are two shows I actually really like. But outside of that, I'm like, what else has this guy done? I've never actually looked it up. And I saw that he directed Pineapple Express and Your Highness, and those are two of the most atrocious movies ever made. So
those are fighting words for certain people on Pineapple Express. No, I don't think anyone's going to defend Your Highness. Though.
No, Your Highness. We'll talk about Pineapple Express later.
Okay. I was not a fan. But so yeah, I don't know if I'm just like annoyed by external factors and I'm just in a weird place of mind, but like I'm warming up to the movie more as we're talking about it. I'll say that. But yeah, C. I'm going to say C. Sorry, that was a long-winded way of saying I'm going to give it a C. In terms of the overall franchise, again, I'm in this place where I just like, I'm so tired of thinking about franchises and like calling films IP and that kind of thing. Like I'm just one by one. Let's take them one at a time and let's, judge them based on their own merits, regardless of like what the overall franchise. But that being said, I'll still play the game. And, obviously, the original Halloween is a classic for a reason, for reasons well outside of like the bloated lore and the franchise and everything that they've done, for better or for worse. So yeah, obviously that's a very well-made film. It has its problems too, but it is a classic for a reason. So obviously that's the number one. I don't think anyone's ever going to rank any of the other films above that one. Maybe three. Maybe three. That being said, I think I would put Halloween 3 next. I do rather like that movie. It's silly. It's goofy. It's exactly just the kind of like Halloween fun with like some genuinely terrifying stuff happening in it. I think it's done particularly well. I would say probably H2O after that. I'm Halloween 4 is just a personal favorite of mine. It was actually the first Halloween movie I ever saw, so I think that's part of why I'm very much endeared to that movie. So I would put that one next. Probably 6 then after that, maybe 5. Change them out. And then I guess the Rob Zombie movies are there too. I don't know I forgot where I put ends in that, but it's somewhere in the middle.
There's too many. There's 13.
There are 13. That's why I was like, we're not going to do 13. I mean, we did the Fast and the Furious at 9, and that was honestly probably too much.
But are we all clear that Resurrection is unwatchable?
It's the bottom.
Okay. It's the absolute bottom.
It's just a dreadful movie.
It ruins H2O. It doesn't say anything meaningful.
That's the main reason. Is it ruins a really good one.
Well, and again, separate it out from the rest of the movies, right? Look at it as just a movie on its own. It's just bad. It's so terrible.
It's kind of incompetent.
The original idea was to make a found footage Michael Myers movie. That was the original idea, and you see aspects of that in it. Okay. But even if you go back to the original idea of like, okay, anything can be garden variety, and that is garden variety, even disengaged from the lore of Michael Myers. It's just a bad movie.
It's rock bottom. It doesn't add anything new. It actively, like Laurent, takes away from the previous film, which is always really bad.
Yeah.
And also he beheads someone with a kitchen knife. You can't do that. That's not how that works. You can't behead someone with just swiping a butcher knife once. That's not how that works.
Unless you're Michael Myers,
I guess.
I'm also going to give this a C. Honestly, the reason being the conversation that we're having. If I walking out of the theater, I probably would have gone like a D+, C-. But I do really admire that there's interesting things happening here. We're going to talk about it here in a moment. And the conversation around this, I think, is going to be a lot more compelling than Kills, because I don't think I've met a single person who likes Kills. I don't think Kills has, even though it has some interesting ideas sprinkled throughout, they're all executed so poorly and dumbly, like that people aren't talking about it. So I do think that this is going to be one of those that, maybe 5-10 years from now, we'll still be having conversations about it to a certain degree. Yeah, that was the weird one. Here's what was interesting.
And that'll be its legacy, and that's fine.
That's totally fine.
So much more interesting, though. So.
And because of that, it gets a C from me. I rank it, pretty in the middle. I go, I think I'm in alignment with LaRon and James. Halloween 1, the original Halloween 2, H2O. I'd probably put 3 after that, then 4. 4 is also a personal favorite of mine. It's silly. It's just well made. That's really the thing. And it's fun. Yeah. But it is also kind of like...
I'll admit that I have nostalgic goggles for it. Like, I'll fully...
Same. It was one of the ones they played on AMC Horror Fest when I was a kid, like every 2 hours, it seemed like. So I like that one. I'd probably Curse of Michael Myers. Then we get into the Rob Zombie 1 and 2 somewhere. Then 5, then this, then Halloween 2018, then this, then it's just it's lower middle for me, but still.
But Kills and Resurrection are at the bottom of the list for everyone.
Yes, yeah,
no brainer. Now, with that said, sounds like we're pretty mixed bag on it. Do you guys have any other form of media you'd like to recommend to listeners who either enjoy Halloween Ends or something they should read, watch, play instead of Halloween Ends? LaRon?
I think Christine, David Gordon Green said that, huge inspiration for him when he was making this movie was he was watching Christine, and then Carpenter's early work, he actually got permission for him. He's like, does this script sound a little too much like yours? And in retrospect, now I'm thinking about it, the whole Corey, well, we're still not in spoiler section yet, but the whole subplot that's added into this particular one is very much swap out Michael Myers for a possessed car. And you'll see that this movie has the blueprint narratively for that. Pretty even how the film concludes is a direct. It happens the exact same way. Let's just put it that way. And Corey Cunningham, Army Cunningham is the name of the character. It's there, guys. Just watch that film.
Okay. So watch Christine. Okay,
This is a fun film.
I wonder what Stephen King thinks about all this.
He actually said the movie.
He quite liked it.
He liked it on Twitter. He said it was a fun movie. Yeah. Okay.
He was like a character-driven slasher movie. He was like, "Give me more." So that was.
Like that hasn't been. Come on, King.
Right?
Come on, dude.
Right.
Let's be, when it comes to movies and God, Stephen King, when it comes to movies, his tastes are a little different than mine.
I do rather enjoy that man. I grew up reading him,
Yes.
But I mean, he's also
His tastes are everywhere, though. That to be fair,
and specifically with movies, like I like the novels, but like his movies are kind of all over the place. But James, what would you recommend to listeners instead of or along with Halloween Ends?
I mean, some of them have already been noted. I wouldn't say instead of. I should have known I was going to be the defender. But I wasn't. Again, I just can't stress enough. That is not how my best friend Randy and his girlfriend Liz, that's not how the three of us walked out of this movie Thursday night. We were all like, I just want a straight ahead slasher now. Like what? Like, but I think it's so defending. But the movies, I think, and I kept thinking about it when Randy and Liz were in that parking lot in Bricktown that night with me. I was like, what does this feel like? I've had this feeling before. It's Rob Zombie's H2. Right, because it's very similar in terms of like how little Michael is in the film. I think Halloween 3 and I think Halloween 6. So I think to really appreciate this film, those are the main references. I think you're Christine. I did not know any of the. I tried to avoid. I don't watch trailers anymore.
Good.
And I was so happy I had not. I watched the trailer for this after I saw it, and I was like, Are you fucking kidding me? Like y'all
they
put
lied
that
to you.
in
They lied
the
to
trailer? But I think I hadn't even thought about Lynch until Chris was texting me yesterday. But now it's like, the font's not only Halloween 3, but it's Twin Peaks Firewalk with Me. But I think those are sort of the main references. I didn't know any of the Christine stuff. I have a lot to say about that in the next section.
Okay. Chris?
I mean, again, honestly, this is photography wise, cinematography wise, this is a beautiful film. Like it is beautifully shot. That is one of the best things about it. And I legit loved the score. Carpenter's score. I think this is the best one out of the three so far. Like, outside of the original, this is a really good score. So I mean the visual references to Lynch, like Blue Velvet and Firewalk with Me, And thematically, we'll get into that a little bit more, but thematically, those are relevant, I think. As James mentioned, within the Halloween series itself, rewatch those. And I would also say, again, we're getting closer and closer to spoiler territory. But there is it's from Denmark, I think. It's a slasher film called Cub. Really, really good, sort of like latter day slasher. Is made in like 2014 or something like that. And again, thematically, very similar to what's going on in this film. So it's called Cub, or I think, is it Cub? I'm looking at Caleb like he knows what I'm talking about.
I'll verify it in the show notes.
It's either called Cub or Whelp is the Danish. I don't remember what it's. I don't remember what country it's actually from. I'm being offensive, but
the international film.
Yes, the international,
not
film,
American international film,
whose original title is Whelp, translated to Cub. Okay,
I'm gonna check that out. Actually,
it's actually a really good film.
So, 2 lines of thought on my recommendations here. Number 1, if you want to watch a sequel that explores trauma and how it can manifest itself through multiple people and sort of echo through generations, movie almost no one saw, Dr. Sleep. I thought it was fantastic. It is long, I will say. It's like 2 hours and 30 minutes long. Probably could have been a little shorter, but it's a sequel to The Shining.
What's that?
What's The Shining? Yeah, I don't know.
I've never heard of
Class. Speaking of Stephen King,
The Shining. Remember that from The Simpsons?
The Shining.
I love that segment so
my
much.
God.
So good.
man, I could use some Simpsons right now. But I just want to throw that out there because people don't see it, and it really does, I think, deal with Danny, what sort of the impact of that situation had on him growing up and him as a person, as an adult, and how he sort of handles it both personally and to sort of like his next of kin, so to speak. I recommend it. It's not The Shining 2.0, and that's another reason I like it. It's a sequel that's doing something fundamentally different. If you want to look at other weird horror sequels, some of which I think have led to some pretty powerful conversations and have aged well, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, a movie that I don't think people appreciated when it came out as much, but there's a lot of things to be said about it, a lot of discussions to be had. Best case scenario for Halloween Ends is it's one of those where we're still talking about it and you're like, well, it was on to all this stuff that we didn't really see at the time. Yep. Hopefully. Yep. Best case scenario.
I mean, if there is a strong gay undercurrent that we discover in Halloween Ends, I will really be into it. James, you think so?
I felt something.
I said, we'll talk.
We'll talk.
You know, I came out of my mouth and I was like, oh, actually, yeah.
See?
Yep. Okay.
See, that's what I'm saying.
Just
all right.
Be
we are
ready.
everywhere, guys.
Yeah, we have always been here.
We've infected your movies, your kids, your children. No, let me stop.
I'd also throw out, I'm not saying this is good. I'm just saying if you like sequels that have a very different take on your fundamental iconic slasher, you go watch Friday the 13th Part 5. Yeah, it's not good, but it's interesting.
It's my best friend Randy's. I think it's, besides Part 1, which he will quote to you word for word, Part 5 is his favorite.
Wow.
Okay.
That's
That
wild.
is so interesting to me.
Oh, I could be misrepresenting him because I feel like maybe he loves 4 a lot, but 5 is like high.
Pretty high
High
up
up
there.
there.
Yeah. I again, I don't think that my recollection is it's not great, but man, I was thinking about that movie for days. I'm still thinking about it. You know,
the scene with the guy, he's eating the chocolate bar, and then there's the guy who's chopping wood. Like that's a legit, like what we were talking about, like characters that you really kind of feel for, and you feel bad for when they die. Like I feel real, like that's an effective scene. Like it's shocking, but it's just like, oh my God, this maniac just chopped this kid in the back. You know, like it's awful, and you feel for him.
Or if you like a different take on an iconic slasher, Friday the 13th Part 5. We have teased it for far too long. Let's go ahead and get to the spoiler section. So if you don't want to be spoiled on Halloween Ends, go ahead and tune out now.
Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock. Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
It's almost time, kids. The clock is ticking. Be in front of your TV sets for the Horror-thon. And remember the big giveaway at 9. Don't miss it. And don't forget to wear your masks. The clock is ticking. It's almost time.
All right, so I have in the spoiler section, a few things I wanted to put out there. So let's start by talking about both this trilogy, but more specifically this film's theme, I guess you would say, the corrupting influence of fear and evil. I think it's the consistent thing, especially in these two sequels, Kills and Ends. But despite what the marketing materials have led us to believe, Laurie's showdown with Michael is a very, very small part of this film. Literally the last 15 minutes of the movie.
It's an afterthought.
It feels like it, yeah. Now, Halloween Ends instead centers on Corey Cunningham, who is a person who is bullied, and the sort of boogeyman energy that was once on Michael Myers is channeled onto him after he accidentally kills a kid he's babysitting because that kid was being a little shit. Yeah. So I just want to throw this out there and see what you all's take is. What story do we think that David Gordon Green and team are aiming to tell with this sort of shift in perspective? Because again, Michael Myers really, I would say more than anything, I wouldn't even say bookends because he's not in the beginning. He shows up early in the movie towards the end of the first act and then again in the third act, but he's really not in the movie outside of those times.
He's briefly in the another kill scene that reminded me a lot of Martin, actually, the George Romero film from 1972 with the plate glass, like big plate glass windows. And he's dressed kind of in black. And he's on sort of the outside watching Michael Myers do a bob on this nameless nurse character. That I she has a name, but I don't remember.
Nurse Deb.
Nurse Deb.
Deb. It's Deb.
It is Deb.
Yeah.
Oh.
I was on IMDb earlier. That's the only reason I know that.
So anyway, I don't know. I'm being
okay. I'm just gonna throw out how about this? I'm gonna throw out what I think, and I want you all to tell me why I'm wrong or why I'm right or why what I say needs to be tweaked, and we can go from there. Because the thing I find most compelling about this movie is the idea that Michael Myers' greatest legacy is how much he has terrified this town so much that people are willing to create other boogeymen to sort of be the target of their fear. They are looking, this fear is created because he goes on a killing spree, and they're constantly trying to find other people to pass along to. Again, kills in a horrible, dumb, bad manner, tries to capture this with the angry mob, but they do it in a much more sophisticated way in this by trying to personify it with Corey. Oh, okay, so Corey accidentally kills this kid a year later, and now he's the monster, so the whole town's going to hate on him. They're also apparently pissed off at Laurie for getting over it. I guess it's kind of weird. But I like this idea that it gets into this nature versus nurture on Corey. Is Corey inherently evil? Is it because the town's trying to turn him into a boogeyman? And only when he does not fully embrace his sort of evil side until he comes into contact with Michael Myers. There's lots to unpack here, but I think the idea is that evil is the town has been traumatized. And this trauma is directly impacting individuals and the way that people think about other individuals in the town. Before Michael just shows up at the end and kills Corey and then gets killed. I mean, which feels like a totally different movie. But I don't know. What is your take on the Corey story? Laurent?
I like it as an idea, but my issue is that I've always liked the idea of Michael being this manifestation or personification of evil as a metaphor. Here it takes it literally. And so it plays with that, or it jumps back. It's not consistent with its messaging. It feels very much like, there seems to be a literal transference almost of evil here, like when they're first introduced, which I also feel is kind of haphazardly done because he's not chosen. He's just happy. He's thrown down there and he happens to be by the well that Michael Myers is at. So that feels very, very convenient. I was always very curious to see how that was going to come together. But
by the way, Michael Myers, who has apparently just been living here for 4 years in the sewers for 4 years,
surviving off of rats that we never get to see him eat. And I begged for that scene. It didn't happen.
Again, very reminiscent of Halloween 5, where he just apparently stayed around for 1 year in some dude's house. But yeah, anyway.
I like it as an idea. I would just wish it was fleshed out better. It, again, feels very shoehorned into the concluding chapter of a series that did not introduce this, in the two earlier iterations. So it just feels like If they were going to tell this story, Corey should have been in 2, or 2 shouldn't exist, and this should all just be one film. It just feels like we got 4 movies in this 3-series trilogy, but they're pigeonholed into the last 2 films. So I'm not opposed to the Corey subplot. I just feel like I wish it was more organically woven into this trilogy, because the first 2 are very Laurie Strode, Michael Myers heavy. That is the through line. That is the story that we're telling. And then this one feels like, let's have a broader conversation about evil, but it seems like a little too late at this point for me.
No, absolutely. I mean, because I think my thing is, I love the idea that the third movie, theoretically, the third movie, Michael Myers he is maybe the ending of this movie where he gets chopped up into little pieces and they definitively kill him. Feels like it would be a better ending to Kills. Mm-hmm. And then we get this movie afterwards where it's like, okay, yeah, he's gone, but
this is the
because of the impact he had on the town, this is like how they think about other people. They find someone to call the boogeyman, and all of a sudden that's where the transference of energy goes. But the movie hints at that, but there's all these weird plot holes and nonsensical mental gymnastics you have to do about the fact that Michael Myers is still out there, and they just act like he's not a big deal. James, you're being quiet but nodding your head. What are you thinking about the use of Corey?
Okay, there's so much I want to say, but I think my main problem with this film is the actual death of Michael Myers and the procession at the end. And this is my problem. It's not unique to Halloween. Are y'all familiar with the French philosopher Rene Girard?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So I just find all of his understanding of how myth works at play here, and the scapegoating mechanism, right? Like where the community rallies around the death, right? The sacrifice of a figure who it has seen as divisive, guilty party in this sort of way, that through that death, the community is able to heal. Mm-hmm. And so as I was watching it the second time, I could only hear Girard in my head, right? You can see what I'm saying here? Like, I mean, and it's so much, it's in the dialogue in the film, right? In fact, Laurie's kind of closing narration is where she talks about, and then the town had its resolve. Okay, well, that is just textbook myth, right? Mm-hmm. Like through the death of the king, we are able to come together here. Well, I hate when a story does that, right? Because that sort of sacrificing body, my understanding, at least people who take Girard's work seriously, which he does not take his own work seriously. He likes the scapegoating mechanism, right? He thinks that societies, that's how they resolve conflict. Otherwise, we would constantly be at war with one another. So we have to have this scapegoat. And I just think that's a huge problem when you have a scapegoat, because that's how we get Hitler with the Jews. That's how Trump. You get Trump. I mean, it just is what it is. Yeah. It just is what it is. So I think that's a problem. I'm more forgiving when it comes to its presence in some ways in a story, because I do take seriously that kind of ancient Greek idea of like catharsis, the idea that like maybe we work out that tendency towards scapegoating and toward violence through the story, and it purges it from us doing it in real life. I say almost forgiving because I actually kind of come to the opposite belief, where I think when we see that play out in a story, I think it reinforces for the society to keep scapegoating. Like that violence is how you resolve your social conflicts or your interpersonal conflicts. And as a student of nonviolence, a student of Jesus, and a student of Martin Luther King Jr., like and Clara Luper, Oklahoma's own, like the woman who did these nonviolent protests with her students to desegregate essentially Oklahoma City. I have a hard time when a story uses violence to resolve its central conflict. And I think and the fact that they literally have his kind of arms outstretched on the roof of that car as they are, wheeling his dead body through the town, I think is it's very Jesus-y and very much a problem. Now, I said I have a lot here. So that's one thing that I think is a problem because I think it gives the characters in the film, I don't know what lesson they've really learned them because it strikes me that, so Gerard's one thing to kind of bring up there, but then I think we have to talk about trauma and intergenerational trauma, especially since Jamie Lee Curtis and David Gordon Green insist that we do. But if you go, I think that the problem with the scapegoating mechanism here is that it allows the characters in the film and maybe us as the spectators to ignore, kind of to your nature nurture question. Well, there was already a rot in Haddonfield,
Right.
and it's not Michael, right?
Yeah.
Michael, that I think that's to miss something, right? Because when you go back and you watch the moment where the mother, Joan, I believe is her name, Corey's mom, as he's falling in love with Allison, and he's going to take off with her, and she slaps him, and she's already been like chastising him the whole time in this sort of like no boundary sort of way, but after she slaps him, she leans in,
kisses him
on the lips.
Yeah.
On the
very odd.
lips. And that starts sending some signals to me. Like, has this woman touched her child sexually? It
was weird.
The fact that he struggles to be in a relationship with Allison, the fact that he's already a bit awkward at the beginning of the film, I just wonder the level, especially in a subgenre that deals with sexual repression, like what's going on with that character. So yeah, I'll just kind of stop there for now. I that's kind of on my mind.
I really appreciate you diving into that and digging a little deeper on this idea of the scapegoat, because I think that's one of my bigger issues is the film concludes with, all right, we killed this guy, we paraded him around the town so everyone could see, and we held a whole ceremony where they literally disintegrate his body. And that feels gross to me, number one. And number two, again, I think I'm not going to sit here and say, well, here's how you write a movie. I know it's not easy. I know it's complicated, but I really think that would have been a great, even though Halloween Kills was a disaster, if they had put that scene in 2 and the follow-up in 3 is, oh, but the evil's still here. Like that is, and then Corey is the main character, and we sort of follow that plot line, and the curse of Michael Myers, in quotes, I know to sort of echo that film, is not some supernatural cult. It is fear. It's a very real thing, and just because you kill one boogeyman, it's not the evil's defeated. It's not that simple. You write a little book and it's done. It's still out there. The people who seem to be in an economic downturn, as a lot of rural America is these days, that's not going to go away. It's not over. And for the film to end the way it does, as the conclusion of the trilogy, really rings just hollow for me because of the sort of the scapegoat mechanism that you're talking about here.
It had 4, 5, 6 maybe writers on this one. It needed 4 more, and we could have just swapped some of these ideas out. But no, I agree with you. I think too, it's short-sighted in that messaging, because like as we mentioned, even in the Trump era here, like Trump wasn't the problem. He revealed the problem. You know what I mean? And now he's not the president, and the poison of Trumpism still exists here. It's still present.
He didn't invent these things.
He didn't invent these things. He became the Michael Myers of these things. And so it feels very much like we're still dealing with the aftermath of that, because it was always here. It was always present. Right. He just brought it out of us. So I wish it was a little bit more sensitive in its messaging with that, because as you said, it's a little too convenient and too hallmarky in a way.
Yes.
To have Laurie Strode, which this was she made the decision that she wanted to end the movie with her on the stairs of her house, on the porch of her house, and had this happy, because it's how Halloween 1 kind of saw her, this outlook of I get that from a sentimental standpoint, but it just rings emotionally false. You know what I mean? In terms of any
after
form of
she
realism.
dedicated most of her life to killing Michael Myers, were he to ever show up again.
Yeah.
Is it really that easy to go back to living a suburban life and everything's fine? You write a book.
Well, in 4 years, she forgot about Judy Greer. And so, I mean, I guess she...
Well, that's another thing. Again, I'm not sitting here trying to rewrite the franchise, but that was another thing that was weird.
No, yeah.
It's just weird because if Michael was dead at the end of Kills, it would her being able to be at peace about her daughter's death, be like kind of try to start over makes a little more sense to me versus here. It's like, it doesn't ring true at the beginning and it makes the ending feel extra hollow and just a little icky to me at least.
Well, and like, so you already have from Corey this his house. It's not a mentally well house, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's clearly some undiagnosed trauma and mental health stuff going on in the Cunningham house on the one hand. On the other hand, not on the other hand, at the same time, if you go back and you pay real close attention to the dialogue and the mannerisms of Mr. and Mrs. Allen at the beginning of the film, like there's moments where she's talking to him, to Corey, and she'll ask him a question, but then she just immediately is like yelling upstairs to the child. And so she's not really present in a way that anyone who, is not kind of a bit in narcissism land. You know what I mean? Like
right.
So, and then now think of their house too. It's like this well-to-do upper middle class house, strongly upper middle class house. And so I feel like then the way her child is behaving, you can she blames it on like, well, that Michael Myers stuff from last year. But there's something off about that family. And blaming Corey for the child's death is kind of a way to like scapegoat there, right? Mm-hmm. But something's already wrong. And I guess kind of to your point about like the economic hardships of town, like, and this just goes back to my earlier comment, like everyone should be in therapy. Like I stand by that. Right. And I think that the film elides that by killing Michael. And I think what it ends up doing is it lets the audience off the hook. Well, we killed Michael. That's what evil is. And it's like, no, like that's evil is, we enact evil on each other as a result of undiagnosed traumas that have been passed. And we now know also it's passed down neurologically, right? Mm-hmm. Like we know that. We know that when a parent experiences trauma in their own life and it's not, they don't learn to manage it, they don't go to therapy, it passes down through the DNA. We know that. And so my guess is a good chunk of Haddonfield is living through that, And there's a major question here, and I've always been skeptical of this reading of the first Halloween, but maybe I'm starting to come around to it. But I remember someone once kind of asking like, well, why does Michael kill his sister? Like, what it's easy. The easier reading in that film is like, oh, he's stalking Laurie because she looks like his sister. That I understand. But why does he kill his naked sister, right? And the psychoanalytic readings always said, well, he's misunderstood violence for sex or sex for violence. Okay, well, why? Mm-hmm. Like literally why? Like what has gone on in that house? And so a reading I heard a few years ago was like, I don't know, what did his sister do to him? What did his mom do to him? And I don't know, I've tend to reject that, but something's off. Like, and so it just makes me wonder, like, why is Michael what he is? And so then I become more forgiving. I don't think he's transferring. I mean, the movie kind of elides this, but I don't think he's transferring things, right? Because when it goes into Corey's eyes as Michael's choking him, it's all Corey's experiences. It's not Michael's.
That's true.
Right?
That's a good point.
And I missed that when I saw it the first time. I thought, ooh, he's like transferring.
It's all his memories.
But it's all him. And so it just kind of makes me think this is like an old man Logan kind of Wolverine thing where like Michael's just this like, he acted compulsively, but he's not just like evil doing the devil's work.
Well, and that's why I really like, because to your point that you said before, James, that Michael does belong in this film. And I agree with that, but I think as like a ghost, as like an actual
vision.
Correct.
Yes.
And not a flesh and blood living, sewer dweller. You know what I mean? Like it's something that has captivated Corey's mind. It's something that has been existing in his mind, and maybe he thinks that Michael is actually real. Right. And I was waiting for that sort of reveal that he's not actually down there. But the Accords go, no, he has to be there. Sure. So, but I mean, this brings up the original idea for Halloween 4, when they were going to bring John Carpenter back into the fold. And that this was his idea. It's like, well, Michael's not alive anymore. Like, we definitively killed him in the second one. Like, he is dead. But this town is haunted by him. And so his presence is supernatural, like literally. Like, there's a scene in the script. The entire script is not available, but there was an interview with Dennis Etchison, the horror writer who penned the script. John Carpenter asked him directly, said, "I like your work. Will you write Halloween 4?" And there's a moment where there's like a pumpkin patch, and like Michael Myers comes exploding out of like a mountain of pumpkins and grows to like 12 feet tall. Like, it's crazy cocaine 80s stuff going on. But
Can we get that? I'll still sign up for that version.
yeah, I mean, one day, maybe in the next iteration. But yeah, Michael he didn't want it to be this literal flesh and blood man anymore. He was an idea. And who knows if it was the same idea of him like plaguing someone, inspiring them to kill. But I think we got about as close to that idea as we could with this particular film of Michael literally being a boogeyman. But again, I think that because he is flesh and blood, and then we have to sort of deal with him at the end, I guess, it really downgraded the quality that this film could have had with these ideas, having him be flesh and blood here.
The idea. So I guess my big thing was I really was engaged and invested in the Corey storyline. Yeah. I mean, I know a lot of people might hate it, but I was really curious. I'm like, how is this kid going to turn out? Is he going to go full Michael Myers? Is there going to be the big question was like, is this going to be a redemption arc for this guy? Is he like, where are they going to take it? And what's this going to mean for Allison? Right. That's
that was sort of my big problem with it too, is that I didn't feel there was any question. Like, from the get go, I'm like, I know where this is going. Like, they showed him wearing the coveralls, when he's working on the, he's a mechanic. The mask, the scarecrow mask that he wears was very reminiscent of the clown mask from the original film. Like it's a scarecrow and not a clown, but like the smile and the eyes were very similar. And then when he meets Michael in the sewer, I was like, okay, well, I know exactly where this is going. So there was never that tension for me of like, will he or won't he?
See, I agree with the version we got. I agree. I think my problem was I was really interested in seeing how the film would conclude Corey's storyline until they're like, oh, wait. He doesn't actually matter. Michael's just going to kill him. And
his unaliving himself was very hollow. It didn't make any sense. It didn't, it came out of nowhere for me. He goes through all of this and then he's just like, well, if I can't have her, I'm just going to stab myself in the throat at the end. Except that doesn't kill him, because apparently in this series, no one can die from throat injuries. Like, everyone survives.
He grabbed his neck. He got a little extra strength.
Yeah. It was the transference when, when Michael's giving him his powers through the eyes.
I just to say, I'm with you on the version that we got. It does kind of rob the movie of a proper. That was a storyline. I was really eager to see how they concluded it.
Absolutely.
And up until Michael Myers shows back up and you're like, oh, I guess
it's a compelling idea. And I think that it does in some ways grasp it, but it ultimately is just grasping. I feel like it's never
It doesn't commit
right,
at the end.
Getting it.
I also really, and it's, I mean, I'd be interested if interviews exist with Gordon Green and the cinematographer on this, but like both viewings, it really stood out to me in that opening scene where when Mrs. Allen opens the door to Corey, hi, Corey, like it's this POV, like she's staring at us, right? So it's a straight on look at us. Like it's almost like a second person kind of narration, like you were in the story. In the same way that the original film in that opening scene positioned us as young Michael, it is right then positioning us as
that's interesting.
Corey. And then there's the reverse where he looks at her, right? And this happens a couple times in that kind of moment. And I don't know if that was intentional, but that feels intentional.
Right. That's very Jonathan Demme with
the Silence of the Lambs thing. But it seems in that way to implicate the audience as you are just as capable of.
Well, that's the campaign. That's the campaign that we talked about. Jamie Lee Curtis's campaign for trauma for this series is that this particular story is centered around us being the monster. She kept saying, "You're going to be really angry when you see this film." She didn't say why. Now we all have different reasons why. But her reason and rationale for why we were going to be angry was that the movie's going to tell you that you are the monster. And so I think that definitely is there, if at least narratively, if not also stylistically. But I think that as we've kind of already discussed about the ending, they kind of derail that messaging by scapegoating it to Michael.
They're sticking their toe in the water, but they're never fully diving in, I think.
I was listening to the new, did y'all listen to Halloweenies, that podcast?
No.
Not to bring another podcast into this. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, it's great. Yeah, check it out. Halloweenies, recommend.
But they had a Halloween Ends episode, and when I was listening to it, they were asked, like, they had a problem with the ending too. They didn't mention like the scapegoating and all that, but so shame on them. So if you want smart, elevated podcast, you listen to us frequently. But they had a problem with the ending itself though, and it's like, well, how do you fix that? And I can't remember exactly what one of them, like the word for word what they said, but like you do it where they slit his throat and his wrist, and then you cut immediately from that to them throwing his body into the if you want that ending of his death and the thing, then you cut immediately to that, and then your movie's done. Like you do not give that sort of nice, neat bow of like, and then they all lived happily ever after. It's like, no, maybe they don't. Like maybe you don't. So I don't know that quite fixes it, but I think the problem is like the nice, neat bow, because if you're all the monsters, you all have to go to therapy, right? And that's not the message at the end of this film.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, and again, I think I think I'm right on the same page there. I would removing Michael Myers though. Take it a step further. What if the end of the movie is the town just like hamstring, like they string up Corey and they murder him, and then you, the audience, are like, wow. I mean, you make it all cool and cinematic and stuff, but like at the end of the day, I think that's way more impactful. Of, wow, this was a kid who was for all intents innocent until the town punished him for an accident, and you, the audience, indulged in that up until the end, and you realize, oh wait, this was a tragic death. Yeah, and you do that through the lens of Allison, who witnesses the better parts of him. You know, again, I'm not going to pretend to be a filmmaker and say things are easy. I just.
What you're saying is better than what we got.
It's just more compelling. It just is more compelling, and it leaves an impact, because here's the thing. It kind of leads me to my next question about sort of the legacy of this trilogy. I said this to my fiance Lauren. She didn't see Kills last year, and I was originally going to catch her up so she could go with us on Thursday.
Lucky her.
Yeah.
Right. And then I
envy.
We realized
the world she lives in.
Then I realized the buzz, there weren't early reviews for this one. So I said, actually, let me see it first. It'll be on Peacock, because if it's bad, you don't have to watch Kills and Ends. And though I found a lot to like in this film, I think this entire saga, I feel like is completely inessential. Like, I don't think you need to see them. I think their legacy is that they had a lot of cool ideas that never quite came together. And I'd love to hear what you guys think. Is this going to be something we look back on in 10, 15 years of, well, that was the Michael Gordon Green, Danny McBride take, and it was really unique for these reasons. Because I will tell you right now, and again, having gone back to Halloween 2018 and just seeing how quickly that one kind of faded from memory, I don't see these movies really lasting in the long run. LaRon, what are your thoughts on sort of the longevity of this iteration?
I think for the reasons that we're talking about, the ways it gets it wrong will make it a valuable piece of cinema to just dissect about. See, this is how it mismessaged this larger issue. So I think it creates a conversation about what the movie was trying to do and what it ultimately did or did not accomplish. So from an entertainment value or just like a pure enjoyment value, maybe not. That just differs on how much you liked this one. I mean, the last two. But I think it will be interesting as a conversation piece about trauma and how trauma has been represented in film or misrepresented in film. And I think that is useful. That is useful as a tool, so we can kind of see what kind of patterns and cycles as a society what we have with our messaging around this issue and how some films get it right and some don't. I think Hereditary gets it a lot better.
Yeah, well said. Chris, any thoughts on the legacy or longevity of this iteration?
So, at the end of the day, people want to see Michael Myers kill people. I even do, in terms of the 2018 film, I will say that as far as like a competently cohesive scripted film goes, 2018 does a pretty good job. It's cohesive. It tells the story from beginning to end. It's fine. It's not great, but it's fine. Do you need to watch it? Yeah. With this, I would say out of all three of these, this last one, Halloween Ends, has the most going for it in terms of sheer ideas, in terms of something that is actually compelling to talk about. Because we could not be having this conversation about the 2018 film, and certainly not for Halloween Kills. Like, what we've said about Halloween Kills is what there is to say about it, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. This film does have a lot of questions it's posing. But I just think in the end, and just sort of like with the trilogy, if you even want to call it that, because again, this is the messiest trilogy I've ever seen in my life.
More than the new Star Wars
I
trilogy?
know, that was immediately. I was like,
I didn't see the last two, I'll be honest.
Oh,
so
you
I can't
are
even speak to
also
that.
a lucky person.
Yeah. You envy the world I live in. But yeah, it's real messy, and there's the execution is really the problem here. There's so many ideas going on just within this film, and not enough time, not enough nuance. Honestly, I don't think enough talent, really, because I go back to David Lynch, right? And this, like, there are so many references to David Lynch in this film, like very direct references. I won't get into them all, but they are there. But like the Lost Highway shot, for instance, like the lines on the highway is in Halloween Ends. And again, I mentioned before, Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me are probably the two biggest influences on this film. And one thing we haven't mentioned yet is the film ends. It's nice and it's happy, right? It's a happy ending, but they're like, the Michael Myers mask is on her coffee table at the end. Does that suggest that evil didn't die tonight? I don't know. Is it like the lingering, evil that will continue on? I don't know. I don't think the filmmakers know either, and that's a problem. But going to Blue Velvet, right? Like, Blue Velvet has the my favorite opening of any film of all time. Like, it is so good. And if you're not familiar with it, it's blue sky, blue skies, white picket fence, and red roses. So like immediately those color schemes and the idea of picket fences and what we keep out, it's established immediately. And then there's a sequence with like a fire truck and there's people waving. It's very surreal. And then a guy has like a stroke and the camera pans down into the grass and just shows like close-ups of bugs just like mulching and eating, and the sound, obviously David Lynch, so the sound just envelops you. And it's so brilliant. I mean, it lines up perfectly what this film is. Here is a picture of America, and here's what's actually beneath all of that. Mm-hmm. Blue Velvet also ends with supposedly the restoration of the white picket fences. The man who has a stroke at the beginning, he's fine now. He's sitting in the back drinking lemonade, and the bright, fresh-faced young couple who are supposed to be together, although there's way more chemistry between Kyle MacLachlan and Isabella Rossellini than there is between him and Laura Dern, and that's by design, I think, because actually those two have a lot of chemistry together. But the film ends with this Robin, and like Laura Dern has a speech about like the Robin and something about the restoration of peace at the end and everything. And there's a robin who has one of these bugs in its mouth at the end of the film. And David Lynch, I think, because his tongue is planted firmly in cheek, he says, "No, that bird is real. That's a real bird." It's not a real, I mean, that is not a real bird. That is like, if it is, that is the fakest looking real bird I've ever seen in my life. It looks fake. It looks robotic. And I've always read that as, yeah, we restored good in the world, but it's fake. It's artificial. It's not real. None of this is real. And the film is very much, Halloween Ends is very much trying to make that same point, and I just don't think it's ever actually getting there for all the reasons we've already discussed. So anyway, that's sort of my overall assessment of David Gordon Green and Danny McBride. Should probably just stick to dark comedy.
Yeah, fair. James, any thoughts on the legacy of this iteration?
Yeah, I mean, listening to you all right now, I would find it very difficult to recommend the 2018 film and definitely not Halloween Kills. Like, I just couldn't. There's like 2 scenes in Halloween Kills. Lindsay's chase scene and the kitchen scene that's shot so well where where Michael's like stabbing the husband on repeat in the background. That's such a great use of depth of field. But other than that, those are just, it's such a garbage film. So I have a hard time recommending them at all. That said, I can't ignore this one. And I appreciated your comment earlier, Caleb, where you said, and you both Chris and Laurent actually, said a version of this too, but like I was on that same high on 2018's Halloween when it came out. Like I was like, this may be the 4th best film in the series, Now I would put it like the 3rd worst, like pretty easily. So maybe I'll find out in a year I don't like this film. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. I might feel that way. So I just prepare myself for that. That said, you all, of course, are familiar with the Final Girl essay from Clever, but you've read the whole book, right? Men, Women, and Chainsaws?
Mm-hmm. I've not.
I haven't.
And I need to.
So, Laurent, as someone who has, I've been thinking a lot about the chapter on the occult genre. The opening up. I think it's really worth our time as horror fans. And I think in this way, the legacy of this trilogy, if anything, it could be that it's asking us, whether intentionally or not, to revisit not just her body himself the way that we've been doing and talk about the final girl all the time, but to revisit it opening up, because it's really been the last 20 years. Like, yeah, the slasher has had its heyday, resurgence, but the occult genre is really where it's been, right? And I say that hating movies like The Conjuring, and I said that, and I hope someone comes for me on whatever.
I totally agree.
There's an
I totally agree.
I'll say it again. But that subgenre is the most like popular right now. And I would even go further and say that all the superhero films, the Marvel films, the DC films, it's right there in the category superhero, right? So I don't think we should be talking about those films just as superhero films. I think we should be thinking about them within the realm of the occult. And I think that's a very useful thing to do, because I think what I'm starting to believe is happening is these films are reflecting and this is my moment where I just become my film professor from undergrad, Betty Robbins. I just think these films are ultimately about a deep anxiety as it relates to gender, particularly as it relates to men, unfeeling men, and trying to get at, and I don't think this movie does it well enough. It doesn't get at the root causes for why either Michael or Corey are what they are. But all 3 films seem interested in it.
Yeah.
Think about the fact that Halloween Kills begins with, what's the boyfriend's name? Cameron. Like, it begins with him, right? Yep. Think about the fact that he is wearing the Bonnie from Bonnie and Clyde
outfit, yeah.
Right? Think about the fact that it brings back Lonnie Elam, right? Yep. The bully, he's a bully in that film, but in Halloween Kills, they're like, well, he's learned his lesson, right? It brings back Tommy. I guess what I'm saying is I think these 3 films, like the occult subgenre generally, seem very reflective of this sort of tension that exists in I don't think it's just in America. I think it's this global tension about what is masculinity. Yeah. What is it? And in the occult film, in that essay opening up, which I just cannot encourage everyone enough to read that. But Clever says that the cover plot is of the possessed girl almost every time. The cover plot of these occult stories is almost always of the woman's story, right? But she says that's the cover plot and that the real story is about a male in some sort of psychological crisis. And she uses The Exorcist as like the main template for this. I should not have to explain myself after that, right? Like the Exorcist is what I mean, it's literally called The Exorcist, not Possessed Little Girl.
Right.
Like it is Damien's story. Well, guess what's a movie that she spends a lot of time analyzing in that essay? Christine. Like, so I think it's probably really worth our time to, because of what these 3 films are up to, whether they succeed or they don't, to bring the other part of Clever into this conversation, into our, not just for these films, but for the state of horror in this new century, or in this new century and in this new decade. And I think it would probably serve us really well. I mean, I knew Cunningham's name, and that was enough for Christine, but I really missed until this conversation the fact that they both end in the junkyard. Because you emphasized Christine as much as you did, Laurent, it made me really remember Clever's essay where she talks about the ways in which, though Christine doesn't tell us how the car becomes demonic, it hints at it as being open. And one of the things she talks about in that essay is how the female characters in the occult, while not the main point, are the ones that are the demonic entrant every time. There's something evil about women is what those films tend to say. And that also, and that this is nothing new. This is Eve in the Bible. It's the oracles in ancient Greece. And Clever is saying, like, this is a problem. If anyone is interested in the representation of women in film, we should be very concerned about what these stories, these occult stories, are saying about the nature of evil as this uniquely feminine thing. So I missed a lot of the Christine Cunningham stuff, but what I had not missed when we were watching this film the first time is the second they showed that the first shot of the sewer from outside, because Clever emphasizes that women are, quote, female portals, and it's because their bodies are like naturally, quote unquote, naturally open, right? Right. Okay, good. Okay. But what Clever points out is that, well, hang on, back up. So I'll start talking over myself in my brain. That in the occult, it's a lot of corridors. It's a lot of holes, right? And so the fact that Michael Myers is in a hole in this film immediately made me realize we were not just in a slasher film, we were in the occult. And I can't help but wonder what someone who's an enterprising student, what they could do with that. And the fact that not only is he down in that hole, but even when he attacks Corey the first time, he's in an opening. You see what I'm saying here? Like this is there's
in
some
a womb of sorts.
Yes, no, absolutely.
Corey
Right.
ejects from it.
And Corey comes out a different person, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then there's stuff going on there, and the fact that Christine is playing so heavily over all of this, I think, is worth our time. I think something that's bothered me about all 3 movies, even though Jamie Lee Curtis is present as an executive director, there is no woman writing anything here, and it shows. These movies are not interested in women at all.
We haven't had one since Deborah Hill in the original. We've not had a woman writing these things at all. And Deborah Hill's contributions are honestly the best part of the original.
It's humanizing. Those women are like well-rounded characters, and none of that exists in these films. Like, so I think these movies are about men, for men, and I think the for men part is where it's a real big problem, right? Gay, are y'all ready? So if all that's true, then think of the cop murder. The way in which Corey is like holding that officer.
And
then
I felt this too.
Yeah, saying, Michael, help, like, show me how it's done. And Michael taking that knife out. And again, anyone who's read Her Body himself on the slasher, the knife's always the phallic substitute. I'm not saying anything new here. This is not breaking new ground. But when you apply it in this film, that moment where Michael is stabbing this cop that Corey is holding, I don't know what kind of gay threesome that moment is, but something Clever says that these films reveal, the occult, is that women on the surface are the opened human but this is to ignore the man's butt, right? It just is, and his mouth. And she says that what it ultimately reveals is that these films are very much about the repression of queerness and these men who are unfeeling, and by the end of the movie have to either learn how to open up, admit their emotions. If they don't, they die, right? If they do, they get married. And so I just, what do you do with that? With like Corey does not learn to open up. That moment where Allison holds out her hands to him and he rejects her. That's the moment where the horror really happens. That's the moment where he encounters the sewer, right? And so it really follows the occult tropes in some ways. And so I think and then think of the Scream movies, right? They're slashers, but that's a fucking ghost mask. And so I think I think the legacy of this film is to say that we have missed the mark as horror scholars and as critics if we're just thinking about all of these films as slashers and ignoring the role that the occult is playing, particularly during the rise of incels and white supremacy and toxic masculinity. So
Going back
that's
to Scream 5, dealing directly with that.
literally, and that's how the year began, was with Scream 5. So I think the legacy is that this is a messy 3 films, but that this third one ultimately is an improvement, but that it helps us unlock the fact that we need to be rethinking the way genre is working right now and what it's saying about us.
Absolutely. And James, just for context for listeners, in case they missed it the first time, the essay you recommended, could you remind me what is it and where can they find it?
So it's film professor Carol Clover, and her book is called Men, Women, and Chainsaws. It's from the early 90s. The famous essay is Her Body Himself, and that's where we get the final girl concept. The chapter I'm recommending in addition to that is called Opening Up. One more thing that I'd hate to not note, and it's hit me both times I've watched it. If I were writing an academic paper on this, I am not, because counsel and teaching keeps me quite busy. But if I were, I would call it The Night He Came Home less. As someone now on council, and homelessness is the number one issue we get calls and emails about. Number one. This won't surprise anyone at this table. I just got back from Seattle, homelessness. I think the fact that when we first meet Michael, even before we meet him and we see that hole, we see the homeless man first. And so kind of, Chris, to your point about Blue Velvet, like there's this rot beneath the surface. And the fact that you have this unhoused individual who also has this mental health illness, right, that leads him to act aggressively. Too many people think that a homeless person is a threat. No one at this table, but you know the people I'm talking about. A homeless person's a threat, and they're going to hurt us and get them out of – I don't want to see them. And they forget that they're more likely to be the victims, right, of crime. And that when they do act out in those ways, like, well, now let's start talking about what schizophrenia and what desperation, right, whatever the case might be for that individual. And you see that play out in that homeless person. And then the fact that Michael, right, has been unleashed twice from a mental health facility with no real, like, both his doctors suck. Like, they're exploiting him. And now after his second rampage in Halloween Kills, he's homeless and he's just out there. And I just think in that way, the film's legacy, and I don't know the extent to which they intended it, but I think it can't help but bring to the surface, as horror always does, reflects what we're going through. And this whole country is going through a housing and homelessness crisis. And too often we want to ignore it and be like, oh, it's their fault that they're homeless. And it's like, no, we what? Like there's this whole conversation about who is homeless, what role does trauma play in that? What happens when you don't fund public education properly? What happens when you don't have enough of a housing stock? What happens when you don't have access to mental health care? So in some weird ways, I think this movie is kind of having that conversation with us. And I think the fact that the original tagline for the film is The Night He Came Home, I don't think you can ignore that in this film more than ever.
Yeah. Certainly creates the conditions of fear that the town of Haddonfield are experiencing to a certain extent. Just to close this out, Halloween Ends, as we've already said, is the 13th entry in a 44-year-old franchise. Question number 1. Should this franchise continue? In part 2, if so, where do we go from here? LaRon, I'll start with you.
No,
It's done.
it's done.
Halloween ended.
Halloween ended for me, at least. Yeah, I'll see another one if it comes out, but I will probably vehemently hate it. So I'll say no. I'm done.
And this is coming from LaRon Chapman. Listeners can't see this because this is an audio podcast, but he's literally wearing a Laurie Strode t-shirt.
Oh yeah, Laurie Strode for life, but no, I'm done.
Okay. So LaRon doesn't even want to entertain what could come next. Chris, what do you think?
I mean, whether we want it or not, it will.
It will happen. Yeah.
And
Give it 5 years.
I am very like, again, I alluded to this before. I'm kind of exhausted with franchises. I'm exhausted with bringing these characters and these figures back again and again and again. I real quick, I will plug something that happened in the past that James did. It happened a couple of days ago. It was a screening of Night of the Living Dead, put up by the library,
The Metropolitan Library.
the Metropolitan Library System. We love them. And also hosted by Dead Center at the Radio Cinema. And James was also there for a talk back with Sunrise Tipicani, who is a lovely,
Great combo.
lovely person. Yes, it was great. You guys were watching this movie, and you should have been there.
I'll be honest, it did
I
not
knew where
occur
you
to me
were.
that this was the same night until that night. And I was like, wait, that's tonight? I felt so bad, too.
We had this conversation in the theater.
We were literally
like,
at the theater like, wait, was that tonight? Oh.
I didn't mean to call you out.
No, that's fair. It's fair.
But thinking about how revolutionary Night of the Living Dead was, and someone had brought up The Walking Dead during the talk back, and like all the rules that have been established in the zombie genre, right? Like the subgenre, like it all comes from that movie. Little scraps of places prior to that, but like this is the first time it brought all these ideas together. And the word revolutionary was used several times during the discussion by James, by Sunrise. Because it genuinely is. It is a revolutionary film. For all its flaws that we can see now in retrospect, the original Halloween, very revolutionary in so many ways. The original Nightmare on Elm Street, the original Hellraiser, all of these first films before they became franchises, which again, I'll give an exception to Chucky because it was born to be a franchise and it's funny and it doesn't take itself too seriously. So I'll give that one a pass, but everything else and the Scream series, it's not bad if we get a franchise, but the fact, just the emphasis of franchise over something genuinely revolutionary, that's what I'm exhausted with. And, if Halloween does come back, I want it to be an anthology film. I want no trace of Michael Myers whatsoever. I want it to be Halloween 3 Part 2, except not a sequel to Halloween 3. Don't do that. Do something completely different. I'll watch it if it does happen, but don't do it. If another one happens, inevitably it will, as long as the Akkads are alive, Michael Myers will live too.
So maybe what you're saying is no. Just kidding.
Listen. If Blumhouse came to me and said, "Hey, will you write a direct sequel to Halloween 4 in which Jamie Lloyd is the Shape?" I'll be like, "Yeah, give me $1 million and I will totally write that for you." And I would, and even if I didn't write it, I would watch it. But it won't happen because it has to be Michael Myers. It always has to be Michael Myers. And yeah, so I'm exhausted, and it'll happen. Right now, I'm not terribly excited for it.
Mm-hmm. James?
Well, I'll just echo almost word for word what Chris just said. That's where I am with franchises. Yes, there will be more because, I just saw the box office receipts. Like, even though it came in a little bit lower than Kills, it made $41 million.
While simultaneously being on Peacock.
On Peacock, right? So that's going to be a whole thing. In my mind, I've just decided to refer to and think about this franchise the way one would think about the Bond films. It's like, in terms of a property, it's just going to, whichever studio gets it will figure out a way at some point, and new iterations. And then I in terms of horror, I guess its references, Frankenstein, and think of how many Frankenstein iterations we have. Dracula. Yeah. So I think we're, and it's going to be hard for our generation to reckon with that, right? Because I don't know, like we, at least me, I didn't I mean, I always knew there would be sequels. But I don't know that I quite understood when I was, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I don't think I quite understood that these were our Frankensteins and our Draculas.
Right.
I don't think I fully appreciated that. And so I would get mad sometimes when they would make a sequel or not just a sequel, the reboots. That's when I would get mad.
Right.
But now I just kind of am like, well, but they're going to. So kind of I don't want them, though, to Laurent's point. But especially for the reasons that Chris has said, like, I think, look, I was talking to someone earlier today who was talking about the film Bros, the romantic comedy. And, there's all this internet chatter right now where it's like, oh, that movie didn't perform very well. And that's because straight people suck and didn't give gay people a chance. I'm like, no, it's because the movie I haven't even seen it, just the trailer. I actually broke my trailer rule and watched the trailer. And I was like, this just looks generic as fuck. Like, if you've seen Runaway Bride, you have seen Bros. I just rest assured, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm not wrong. Sometimes I'm wrong. I don't think on this I'm wrong. And I think what's happening in The Force Awakens was like the big like awakening for me of the moment that we're living in. Like, I worried when Disney got that property that what they were going to do was exactly what they did. I just couldn't imagine it was going to be as bad as what's the third one, the
Rise of Skywalker. Yeah.
Like where they are just so afraid to take a risk, so afraid to give filmmakers a chance to do something unique and new with the property. And that's why I've been a bit defensive of this film for even trying, and not always succeeding by any chance or by any stretch of the imagination. But like, I just think we're living in a world where 5 companies own everything.
Yeah.
And they answer only to Monday morning bottom line Wall Street. And what that's doing is I think it's just drowning out the potential for new original stories like Reservation Dogs, right? Or even trying to take a risk with the property like the way HBO's Watchmen did.
Yeah.
So what I'm asking for is not, I'm not some snob who's just like, oh, I'm not, that's not it. It's like, no. Don't tell me this is not possible when Watchmen exist, when Wall-E exist. Like, don't do that. Like when Moonlight exists.
Or Prey.
Prey was super fun. Yeah. My gosh. It
did something very original and different.
Yeah.
And,
And don't tell me like, Bros is revolutionary because it's a romantic gay comedy, and thank God there's these gay main characters. You can't say that when Moonlight just came out and won Best Picture a few years ago. I know that's not a romantic comedy, but you can't say that. We can't say that. You can't say that when Weekend exists. I just think we're doing ourselves a disservice and stop rewarding trash.
Yeah, I think, James, you put it really well. I am actually okay with more Halloween. I tend to lean towards the anthology approach very strongly. But Watchmen is a really great example of, okay, the gears of capitalism insist that this thing get resurrected. So
Halloween resurrected? Good night, everyone. Thank you all.
But,
direct sequel.
But, it's funny. They... side story about Watchmen. I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge Damon Lindelof fan. And they had to ask him 3 times to do that show before he finally said yes. And he had a very lengthy Instagram post you can go find where he explains his rationale behind it. But the thing about it was a couple things. Number one, when he did it and decided to make it about race in America, he was like, wait, I can't do that. Number one. So he's like, this is what if we're going to make it, it needs to be this. And for some reason, HBO says I need to be the one to make this, and I'm not going to say no a third time. So he brings in a very diverse writer's room, director's room. And the result was incredible. Yeah. I think it might even be better than the original, honestly.
I think it is.
It's fantastic. And I think if we're willing to really find the right creators with the right ideas and give them the time and the resources they need to execute on these ideas.
And the space and the freedom to do so.
Exactly.
That's the main thing.
Not, hey, we need this movie in like a year. Can you crank it out?
This formula. It's like, let them make the movie they want to make and let them say what they want to say.
It's like, I don't know, go find, I don't know, the guy who just did Barbarian from The Whitest Kid You Know. I'm totally drawing a blank on his name. I don't know. See, be like, hey, If you were able to make a Halloween movie and there were no rules, what would that look like? I don't know, something like that. You find someone who has a passionate take and you invest it. That's where I'm at. I am okay with, I'm not necessarily anti more movies, but there needs to be a really strong idea and there needs to be a really strong backing from the studio and the producers to make that happen and allow it the space to happen.
Yeah,
Is that going to occur? I don't think so.
Well, and to your point about giving these people a chance to do those things, I think the gears of capitalism say we have to keep producing,
right?
To produce a product. And my counter to this is no, you don't. Wait till someone has the idea. And Hollywood, not just Hollywood, but Sony, Disney, News Corp, how about you take all of those profit dollars and why don't you invest them in the 50 states so that they can actually fund access to mental health care? And I know that seems like, what? But it's like, no, what are you doing with this money? Yeah. Like, what's his name? Robert Downey Jr. should not be making $50 million for an Iron Man movie. That is monstrous. That is obscene. That is true. That's the right word. That is obscene. Like on the TV show Chucky, there's what's her face, Tiffany, that character. There's a moment where the Nika character goes, how did you spend $100 million? Like, well, I have a lifestyle that pulled. It's like, and that's kind of it's obscene. And so that's what I think. You wait until the person has a story to tell. You fund that story and you just wait.
Yeah. I think that's acceptable. Then that's how it should be. And you were talking about the IP thing. And I guess the last thing I'll say is right now the Halloween movies are driven specifically to make money. I mean, I'm sure David Gordon Green and Danny McBride, they had a take that they pitched, but I don't think it was necessarily like, this is the story I've been wanting to tell.
Sure.
And it's going to be 3 movies. No, that we have already discussed. They've already shared pretty publicly. They had maybe 2 movies worth of story to tell that they wanted to tell that they then turned into 3 movies. So, and it ties back in with the Star Wars comment you mentioned earlier, James. Like Disney said, how can we make as much money as fast as possible? And that's what they did.
No more trilogies unless it legit needs to be told in 3 films. Otherwise,
standalones are fine.
Standalones are
great.
Mm-hmm. With that said, gentlemen, I think we are out of time. We've in fact talked about this movie longer than the runtime of the film.
Take that, Halloweenies. I think they did 3 hours, but we were leaner.
Yeah,
we tried. I tried. With that said, gentlemen, I know that all 3 of you are doing other awesome things out in our community or on the internet. So I'd love to share. I'd love for you to have an opportunity to share. Where can people find you and your work online? Chris, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I write fairly frequently for the Cinematropolis, which is what we're doing here today. Sort of, we're promoting the Cinematropolis. Kind of. I write for Lit Reactor, as Caleb mentioned before. I'm pretty active on Instagram. That's about the only social media platform that doesn't annoy me. So, just search my name, you'll find me, Christopher Schultz. I have a username, but I'd have to spell it, and it's a whole thing.
I'm going to link it in the show notes, listeners. Check it out there.
Oh, yeah.
LaRon Chapman.
You can follow me on social media. My name, LaRon Chapman, or you can follow me on Letterboxd if you care to hear any of my thoughts on film at black_Cinna_man.
James Cooper, where can people find you and your work?
Oh, I'm nervous now because I said a lot. I talked a lot of shit on Star Wars. I don't know if I want people, but... James for OKC on. I'm on both Facebook and Instagram, but I'm on like a sabbatical from Facebook to protect my mental health.
Good choice.
Good for you.
But Instagram's like photos, so and funny, clever things from like Best of Grinder or whatever. So it's true. I didn't make that up. So yeah, James for OKC.
Excellent. And listeners, of course, you can keep up with all the work we're doing here over at thecinematropolis.com. I believe we're going to have an essay from Daniel Bokemper on Halloween Ends next week, so keep your eyes peeled there. And make sure to go out and enjoy a good spooky season. I mean, it only comes around once a year. Dress up in costumes. Don't do anything too creepy. Have some fun. Watch some scary movies. Until then, thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and we'll catch you again next time.